Hello, welcome to another edition of Resistance TV. The unfolding genocide in Gaza at the hands of the Zionist entity is being facilitated by Western governments who've been lining up to show their support for Israel. President Biden has repeated the plainly false Israeli claim that the Palestinians were responsible for the carnage at the Baptist hospital in Gaza. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken repeated the lie about Palestinian resistance fighters beheading babies. He also reportedly asked the Qatari Prime Minister to censor Al Jazeera's coverage of Gaza. And the US has sent 2 aircraft carriers to the Mediterranean to deter Iran and Hezbollah from opening up another front against the Zionist regime. The French President Macron, has visited Israel to pay homage to the Zionist entity, and he's banned pro-Palestinian rallies in France. Germany's also banned demonstrations in support of Palestine, and other European countries have done likewise. But despite these bans, there's been a huge show of solidarity with Palestine across Europe from ordinary European citizens. For its part, the British government has been positively sycophantic towards the war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu. In a joint press conference, Rishi Sunak even told Netanyahu that he knew the Israeli regime was taking every precaution to avoid harming civilians, which is clearly a barefaced lie. The Labour opposition is even worse, with shadow cabinet ministers falling over themselves to kowtow to the Zionist colony. And when asked in an LBC interview, Sir Keir Starmer said Israel had the right to subject Gaza to a medieval siege, cutting off water and energy. That's prompted even more people to resign from the Labour Party, and Starmer, together with Angela Rayner, were apparently due to meet Muslim Labour MPs earlier today to discuss the party's stance. I don't know what the outcome of that meeting was, and whether Natalie, who's our guest in a moment, she may have some further details on that, or indeed Sean might. So we may be able to get onto that if we know what the outcome of that meeting was. But meanwhile, the British Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has written to every single chief constable in the country, stating that, and I want to quote what she says, waving a Palestinian flag may not be legitimate, such as when intended to glorify acts of terrorism, apparently, is what she said in her letter to the chief constable. She also stated that chants like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, could, she says, amount to a, and I'm quoting from the letter, amount to a racially aggravated Section 5 public order offence. So it's pretty obvious that the political class are utterly out of touch with the electorate on this issue here in the UK and right across the Western world. Anyway, joining us this evening to discuss the developments in Palestine and the political response is Natalie Strecker. Natalie is a long-standing pro-Palestine activist and has spent time in Palestine, and she's still got friends living there. Hi, Natalie. Welcome onto the show.
Hi, good evening, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Natalie, I mean, just perhaps start really, what's your take on what's been happening since the Al-Aqsa flood, where the resistance fighters made that incursion into the occupied territory?
Well, obviously what we've seen is the Western world being exposed for the hypocrites that they are. I think, if nothing else, it's really demonstrated that the West no longer have any legitimacy when it comes to talking about human rights or advocating even for human rights, when we look in the context of Ukraine, obviously, in Russia, or what we know to be a proxy war between NATO and Russia. I mean, I think what's unfolded is utterly horrendous. In all honesty, Chris, I probably feel like many ordinary people do at this time, which is absolutely devastated. We're witnessing a genocide unfold in real time and feeling absolutely helpless. What we've seen is a huge wealth of support throughout. I mean, I think in that respect, what's been really good is the tide definitely hasn't turned in terms of public opinion, because despite the Israeli fight for, propaganda fight, and there certainly is a war going on online too, I think the actual narrative of the Palestinians is still managing to break through in a way that we haven't seen before. It's so asymmetrical, the situation. I think, I mean, I'm sort of witnessing even in my local community, people who tend to be quite quiet are even beginning to speak out, or people who are a bit hesitant or feel that they're not well informed enough are recognizing that what is unfolding can in no way be supported, can
No,
in no way be justified.
no, indeed. Well, of course, we've had 75 years of terrorism and oppression of the Palestinian people by the Zionist entity. But notwithstanding the fact, what I was just saying there in the introduction, that countries like Germany and France and other European countries have pledged their oath of allegiance essentially to the Zionist entity. 192 countries, which includes many of them, backed a ceasefire. The only ones that didn't were the US, the UK, and Israel. I mean, that's an interesting development, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, I think it's really difficult to work out really what obviously, because like you said, that most of the countries, even those that are at this moment banning protests and such, still supported the call for a ceasefire. I'm not sure why they made that decision. I guess maybe recognizing that history will judge them for it, or maybe the potential consequence of, for legal action in the future, for aiding and abetting war crimes. Maybe, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not a political leader to understand why they take the steps that they do. I mean, I don't think it's a surprise that the US vetoed it. They always do. Israel, obviously, we don't even need to have a conversation about why Israel vetoed it. In terms of the UK, well, I said a long time ago that I thought as a nation we were moving into fascism, and people thought I was being very negative at the time. But when you look at the different legislation that's come through, whether it's the policing bill, the nation and borders bill, whatever, all the different covert human intelligence sources bill, all of these things demonstrated that fact. So, fascist states are going to support each other. And what's happened in terms of Israel is that it's moved from being just a racist state to being a fascist state. I mean, we're seeing Israeli journalists, obviously, who support the Palestinian cause or the fight for a just peace, needing to either losing their jobs, being arrested, but some, like Israel Frey, I think his name is, having to go into hiding because they're being attacked by violent mobs. So, I mean, I think in terms of what happened in Europe, it's very clear. I mean, my concern is because of the rhetoric that's coming out of America, especially in respect of Iran, some of the comments that have been made around that, and as we look, because we can't ignore Ukraine and Russia within this, there seems to be some other fight going on, which I can't understand what that is or how they feel is a benefit to any of us in the world. But they seem intent on making it, a fight, I guess, an escalation within the whole area of the Middle East. And that's what I find terrifying at the moment, is like I'm asking myself, what is the end game here, really?
No, indeed. What do you make as well? I mean, you've touched on this. I mean, and I mentioned it as well in my opening remarks. The disconnect between the political class and the media, for that matter, but the disconnect between the political class and the wider general public. I mean, certainly, well, maybe on a lot of issues, but I think certainly on this issue, it's never been greater, has it? I mean, notwithstanding all the avalanche of pro-Zionist propaganda from the corporate media, people are still turning out in huge numbers and expressing their solidarity with the Palestinian people online and so on, than has ever been the case in history, as far as I can tell. Certainly, when in the times I've been paying attention to these issues. I mean, that's a source of hope, isn't it? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's definitely a hope when there's such a groundswell of support. Like I said, even locally in Jersey, where I live, we've seen people come out to support what was our plea for humanity. I live in a very conservative, obviously, neighborhood, but I think it's really important, and to recognize that obviously there were Israeli civilians that died within this. And, my stance has always been a humanitarian one, that no civilian should die, in a conflict. But I think that I think, like I said, that people are beginning to recognize how asymmetrical this situation is, that you have it's a settler colonial project. It always was. Palestinians have suffered 8 decades and more, really, if we look at it. But eight
Oh, yeah.
decades of brutalization. They're subject to apartheid. And I think there's only so long. I think social media has given, obviously, an opportunity for the Palestinian narrative to get out, although they're trying, obviously, to control that. It's still breaking through. I think there is hope in the fact that so many people are coming out. Like I said, people who perhaps tended to be a bit conservative or felt it was too complicated, so therefore they didn't want to talk about it. But I think it's so obviously wrong that people, I've often said this before, Chris, I actually think as human beings, our tendency is towards good, towards doing
I agree.
thing. If that wasn't the case, then there wouldn't be a need for propaganda. There wouldn't be a need for the dehumanization of people. So I think more and more people are recognizing it for what it is. The problem is you have this total disconnect, like you said, between the political, the ruling classes and ordinary people. And the reason for that, I think, is because they don't need us anymore. Technology. I mean, my fear, and I've said this several times before, and I know that you'll know people who feel similarly, is we're moving into a form of techno-feudalism. So actually, because we've seen the undermining of democracy for different legislation, that's what neoliberalism was always going to achieve. They don't need us anymore, so they don't care about our opinion anymore. But that doesn't mean the power doesn't still sit with us, because if there's enough people that stand up for what's right and what's just, we can still bring about change, because that's the power does lie with us. It's about having the courage to recognize that and to take that stance, irrespective of the consequence.
No, indeed. I mean, this could be a catalyst, not just for the question of Palestine, but for wider issues that you sort of were alluding to there. But what do you think it says about the state of our democracy? Because these characters in Parliament on both sides of the chamber, they apparently rely on us to be elected, and yet they're totally out of step, it seems to me, with the public, and seem to be doing the bidding of the of Israel, of the military-industrial complex. And do you think it's coming home to people that these characters are in the pockets of these very powerful vested interests? I mean, what do you think it says, as I say, about our democracy?
I mean, I would say what democracy in all reality. But I think that people do recognise, and this is the thing, quite often we get caught up sometimes in this argument of the left and the right. And I don't think those labels work anymore, Chris. I've had that sort of conversation with you before. It's really about right or wrong. And I think more and more people are beginning to understand how lobbying groups work, how corporations work, the donations. I mean, there's been so much dishonesty, even in the leadership. Sorry, my mind's just gone back. But even the leadership race with Keir Starmer, when he wouldn't reveal who was donating to his campaign until afterwards. So I think people are recognizing this, and actually that's one thing. Russell Brand, I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, and I think he's quite poor when it comes to Palestine, in all honesty. But what he's done a brilliant job is reaching out to people and showing how the big interests are involved in this and how it works and how it logs. And obviously he has a huge platform. I mean, he has millions following him. And I think that has helped, which is why, like I said, going back to those sort of labels of left and right don't actually work anymore. We need to work out what kind of society we want, and then work towards that, recognizing that sometimes we'll have differing views, and that's okay. But let's work together on the things we can, work together on. And I do think that Palestine, when people understand what is going on, it's still, obviously, there's still some education to be done around the subject for some people. But I think it's a real way of galvanizing people, really, because it's so obvious who's in the right and who's in the wrong here. That's not to justify people's individual acts that I might not personally agree with, but it's to understand the context within which those acts have happened, which, like I said, is 8 decades of brutalization.
No, indeed. And just on that funding, of course, I mean, some of those funders were very prominent Zionists in this country for Sir Keir Starmer. And you're absolutely right. When you talk about, I mean, there is no equivalence in my mind between the Palestinian resistance and the, Israeli offensive forces. They have a multi-billion-pound budget with the most powerful weapons in the world. They have a $3 billion+ contribution from the United States towards the Israeli military every single year. I already mentioned, didn't I, that the US is sending their two of their aircraft carriers into the Mediterranean. And if you look at any liberation struggle down the ages, it's regrettably it's always resulted in violent struggle. I mean, look at some of the slave uprisings. People like Nat Turner, who led a very violent slave uprising in the United States. Look at Nelson Mandela. He was condemned as a terrorist. Indeed, Tories used to have badges printed with, say, "Hang Mandela." Margaret Thatcher said he was, in terms, a terrorist. And now he's venerated, as he should be, as a great sort of iconic freedom fighter. So I think it's important that we get that into context. And what's really frustrating is the way in which the media try and portray this as some sort of equivalence, or that the Palestinian resistance is sort of beyond the pale. And they give like a free pass almost. I mean, there's been some criticism, obviously, of what the Israeli regime has been doing, but that's only because of the intensity. But by and large, and even with this intense bombardment, they're still trying to draw some equivalence between the two. It's absurd, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the thing, violence begets violence. And that's what I try to say when I organise the event over here, was that, like I said, there's some individual acts that we personally might feel were not okay. And I think that that's okay, but we have to always consider context, because context is everything. And you're quite right, different, I sort of made this argument, somebody else, if you look at any struggle that Indigenous people have, from Native Americans, whatever group you sort of want to go to, there are always individuals within that who have been so brutalized, they end up acting out. They copy basically the crimes of their oppressor, obviously on a much smaller scale. This is unfortunately what happens. And then obviously, sorry.
What we just got on the screen now is the these apparently utterly beyond the pale brutal resistance fighters handing back an Israeli elderly woman, and they don't look particularly brutal to me. And when you then contrast that with the way in which Israel's security forces treat Palestinian elderly people, there is no comparison, is there?
No, I mean, I've seen it, and that's the thing. I just want to sort of highlight that, that I might think an action, but I'm not. It's maybe not something that I would do, but I recognise the context within which it happens. I just really want to sort of make that very clear.
No, I understand that.
And actually, it is totally asymmetrical. Like you said, you've got Israel that's for 8 decades have brutalized the Palestinians, ethnic cleansing, massacres, regular massacres, demolishing of homes, stealing of homes, I mean, a brutal apartheid. And then you've got some resistance fighters. Israel is funded to the sum of 3.8 billion a year by the US government, fully supported by Europe in undertaking its war crimes and its crimes against humanity. And then you've got some resistance fighters. So in no way is there symmetry between how they're behaving. And you're quite right. I mean, it's been interesting looking at some of the footage that's come with that sort of elderly lady that you mentioned. I'm not sure of her name, but talking about how they were treated, like you said, as much as it might have been a brutal situation that, that resulted them being taken hostage. But actually they were treated with respect, which is so different to, the 10,000 Palestinians that are languishing in Israeli prison cells, who are totally demoralized, who were tortured. A huge portion of them are children. Israel is the only state in the world that imprisons children in this way, and torture them, and all the rest, things that I've already spoken about previously. And I think that they are beginning to lose propaganda. Well, in fact, it's interesting because some of the things that are being sort of translated, I've sort of seen online, just a little bits of clips that I've seen, almost when she's saying something that in any way humanizes the resistance fighters, it tends to get sort of shut down, so you don't get that bit translated.
No.
But obviously, other people are looking at it afterwards. But there's always this, this language of dehumanization. It's not a new thing used. Palestinians are the indigenous people of that region, but it's not unusual language that's being used in respect of indigenous people. As we've seen this, the savages. It's a very colonialist mindset, and this is the problem with Europe generally. Is our governments need to decolonize their minds. They haven't, obviously ordinary people too, but our government, and it, we like to think sometimes that colonialism ended, at the end of the 20th century, but we know that this hasn't been the case at all. It's taken different forms, but obviously when we look at Israel, this is very much using the model of the 19th and 20th century.
I mean, I think you put your finger on it there, actually, Natalie, when you talked about European sort of colonialists, as it were, because essentially Israel is a European colony. The people that have kind of, as it were, settled there are predominantly Europeans, whether they've come from the United States, but originally those people that have come from the United States came from Europe. And it seems they're applying the same sort of well, it not seems they are applying the same sort of tactics like you say that have been done to indigenous peoples by colonial powers down through the ages. And the irony is, of course, I mean, it's often referred to sort of hatred of Jews as anti-Semitism, but the Palestinians are Semites. Most of the Jewish settlers there are not, in reality. I mean, they're not. So that's a really curious situation, really. But I just want to move on, if I can, Natalie. I know you talked about this petition calling for Ursula von der Leyen to resign. Just say a little bit about that, will you, and what's behind it?
Sorry, which petition? Sorry, because I couldn't hear
the petition. Yeah, the Ursula von der Leyen petition.
Oh, the European. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I mean, she's an absolute disgrace. Who is being really encouraging to sort of watch? Obviously, you've got Spain. I think it's the Ministry of Justice. I'm not too sure but the individual's name. But she's come out obviously supporting Palestine and looking at and demanding sanctions. And obviously Claire Daly, who's always been amazing from the Irish, obviously European Parliament member, quite rightly stating that the head of the EU does not represent many European states. I mean, her unequivocal support and unconditional support for Israel as it commits war crimes is despicable. It's disgraceful. And actually, I would argue that there's probably a legal case to be put to Europe for allowing these, because like I said, they're not just giving cover for war crimes, they're actively and openly calling for them, aiding betting by refusing to support ceasefires or by trying to suggest that there's an equivalence in these situations, that that it's okay for a collective punishment. All of these things, they're basically throwing away the rule book when it comes to well, it's not a war, is it? People keep referring to it as a war. It's not a war when you've got a civilian population. By the way, over 50% of them are under the age of 18, being bombarded in this way. It's a pulverization, it's a genocide, and an attempt obviously for mass expulsion into the Sinai desert. And I think that there needs to be an accounting for that. So yes, there is this petition calling for a resignation. I mean, I hope she does resign, but obviously it's very difficult because the whole of Europe is lurching rightwards, and that's because the economic system is failing. There's all these other sort of elements. I think what we're seeing at the moment, what I would say is, I think we are seeing the breaking down of a system. My hope is that something better will be created from that breaking. I always remember Ilan Pappé saying that sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt in a better way. And that's what I try to hold on to hope to. But this is what we're seeing. I mean, EU has lost any legitimacy. As I said, they've got no business talking about any other nation human rights records when we're seeing a genocide unfold in real time, like I sort of mentioned earlier, and actively supporting it and calling for it and saying that anyone who is trying to call for a ceasefire, somehow supporting terrorism. I mean, it's insane. We're in George Orwell's 1984. I just, it's incredibly difficult to manage that. I think I said to you, like a lot of ordinary people, I'm struggling, observing what's happening. I have to dip in and out of it because I can't hold it. I don't know how to navigate seeing this happen in real time.
You're not the only one, Natalie. More than a few people who are not particularly engaged politically have been seeing some of the news reports, and they similarly have found it just too much to take, and so they also have been sort of dipping in that because they can't really compute, they can't cope with these horrific images that are being seen on our screens, and just this unequal struggle that the Palestinians have to engage in at the moment. But I guess on that petition, people can probably find it if they search for it online, can they?
Yeah, you should be able. If you go to actually Claire Daly, I'm pretty sure that she said, I think that's where I found it. But yes, you can find it online. Right. And I would encourage everybody to sign that and any other petition. I mean, I don't know how, I began to lose sort of a bit of confidence really in how petitions sort of actually work and what change they can bring. But when there is significant numbers, at least a conversation is had, and I think that's really important. To do the things that we can do, like I said, I do feel helpless. We do feel helpless, but there are things that we can do. And although we might not be able to change anything at this moment, it means that Palestinians aren't losing their lives without the world knowing. And I think that's as much as important as anything at this moment in time, is to be witness to the horrors that are unfolding and to make sure that the world knows about it. That ordinary people around the world understand what's being done, and often for us in the West, in our name. I mean, it's interesting, obviously, because the global South to some degree have taken a different position on this, which is good, but that's also because they understand colonialism and its impact.
Yes. No, for sure. I mean, just talking about the reaction of the political class and the kind of establishment, I just want to play a short clip of a tube driver who's been suspended by TfL. Can you just play that clip for us, guys?
Free Palestine! 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 Hope you all have a blessed day today. Look after yourself. And keep all those people in your prayers. Have a good day.
Well, that guy was articulating the views of everybody on that tube train, it seems, and I think millions of people across the country, and yet he's been suspended. I mean, what do you make of that, Natalie?
I don't think it comes as a surprise, Chris. I think if we were saying free Ukraine, I don't think anybody would have any problem. We'd probably be saluting him, and no doubt he'd be being called a hero. But again, it's that disconnect between the political and the ruling classes and ordinary people. But also, we know that there are very powerful lobbying groups. We see this. How many people do we know, Chris, who've lost their jobs as a result of, standing up for Palestinian rights? And this is the issue. I mean, history will hold them on high, but at the moment, obviously, people still need to manage within this time frame, this timeline that we're living in. So, I mean, I hope he gets support. I hope that he has union representation that can support him through this, because, like you said, I think it was very clear that the vast majority of people on that tube were supporting him. And actually, a free Palestine, I think you sort of referenced it earlier, when people try and say, that somehow free Palestines means, putting sending all Israelis into the sea or whatever, or being crushed. And it's a nonsense. It's about Palestinians having freedom, justice, equality, and a life of dignity, which every single human being should be afforded. That should be our fundamental rights as human beings. And the moment we think that some people don't deserve that, we are in dangerous territory. I often say, I said it to someone over here, to a politician, political landscapes change all the time. At the moment, it might be Palestinians, but if we allow these new norms where people are dehumanized in this way and genocide in this way, what's to say in a few years it won't be us? So we need to understand our connection with each other as, you know, as humans throughout the planet. We cannot allow norms to be established where people are genocided. You know, these are things that don't belong in this century. They should never have belonged, but they certainly shouldn't belong within this century.
Mm. And just on, you know, looking at the political response and the way in which the media's covered the events in Palestine. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the Hannibal Directive, Natalie, but this is a directive which has been adopted by the IDF for many years, I believe. And essentially that is a directive which basically stipulates that the Israeli forces will do everything they can to prevent soldiers or indeed citizens from being taken prisoner, because when obviously we've seen where they have been prisoner exchanges, and you know, a lot of Palestinians have been freed in exchange for a smaller quantity of Israeli prisoners. But this Hannibal Directive stipulates that, you know, extreme force can be used. And essentially, what it amounts to is that they would sooner kill their own soldiers, their own citizens, than allow them to be taken prisoner. I mean, what does that say about the Zionist mentality, in your opinion?
I mean, it's horrific, isn't it? Rather than advocate for a just peace and work out how can we actually stop a cycle of violence when no civilian gets killed, they would allow their civilians to be killed. I mean, I saw obviously
kill them themselves. Kill them themselves. They would actually kill them themselves.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that. I think Loki covered this very well in his conversation with Piers Morgan. And I'd really encourage people to watch that interview, because although Piers Morgan obviously stopped the interview, I think Loki did a fantastic job of getting some real truths and some analysis out there, which is important. I mean, it's horrific, Chris. You know, the reality is, you know, my position, as I said, is as a humanitarian. I just want a kinder world. I don't want any civilian to die, you know, and for people to kill their own in order, you know, to stop them from being taken hostage, so that there's, you know, any way of leveraging one, you know, different sort of, for peace or for rights, whatever it might be, is, I mean, it is despicable. I find it, I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine over here, Ollie, we talk about this a lot, and he was saying, the problem with you, Natalie, is you keep trying to understand their actions from where you're sitting as a human being. But these individuals are so sick and are so twisted and indoctrinated, they cannot see in the way that you're seeing, and that's why you'll never understand them. You know, and it's hard, you know, because I don't understand that. You know, I don't see who really wins at the end of this. It debases us as individuals, as communities, as societies, and you can see that the moral fabric of Israel is being ripped apart. It's been shredded. And now Israelis are beginning to suffer as a consequence of that. And actually, that's very sad. Obviously, Palestinians are not suffering the same way as Palestinians, but ultimately, nobody wins from this in the long term.
Unless, of course, the resistance succeeds, and let's see how that develops, because the US, despite their threats by, you know, sailing their gunboats, as it were, their aircraft carriers into the Mediterranean, in order to deter, so they say, you know, Hezbollah and Iran from opening up another front against the Zionist entity. There's been virtually near daily exchanges of fire with the Israeli forces along the border with Hezbollah. So, you know, since the latest bombardments erupted, I mean, their threats aren't working. I mean, the resistance seems to be much stronger, much better organized than it's been in the past. Would you agree?
Yeah, that certainly seems to be the case, and it's stupid anyway, because the thing is, when people have no other option left, when they are being faced with, you know, total erasure, annihilation, actually people will fight with everything they've got, because, you know, we said this, you know, in the past, this idea that people will die on their knees is just a nonsense. When there's no other option for them, even if they know they're going to die, they're going to fight. So actually, I think people become, and that's why I don't understand really the US mentality. People are much more dangerous if they think that they're cornered and there's no way out for them. You know, I mean, I hope the resistance does win. I mean, I'm an aspiring pacifist. I've said that to you before, Chris. But you know, people have the legitimate right and under international law to armed resistance. You know, so if this is the only option available to them, you know, I support that. Because we need this to come to an end. You know, we cannot expect Palestinians to suffer another 10, 20, 30 years of this. It's untenable, and you can't erase all Palestinians. It's an absolute nonsense to believe that they can be erased, that people will forget. And I said this over here in my speech I gave on Saturday. Do the West not think that there won't be a consequence to us for this when our governments are supporting this? We saw what unfolded as a result of the illegal invasion of Iraq. I mean, are we really prepared? Palestinians aside, we should always support Palestinians as people of conscience. But let's park the Palestinians. So ordinary people actually want to be paying the price of their government supporting war crimes and genocide.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's just bring in Sean, just sort of see what reaction's been to our viewers this evening, to see if there's any concluding comments in the last few minutes that you might want to react to.
Hi Chris, hi Natalie. Yeah, there's lots of people leaving comments this evening. Obviously people are still in shock about what they're witnessing, so I'll just read a few of the things out for you, the comments that we've had. Actually, John, one of our regular viewers, asks, of our Western government and bureaucratic class with the supporting law echelons, what can we expect as we move forward? Ilan Pape, I'm just about to view in Harvard this week, we're in deep trouble.
Well, that's pretty, self-evident, isn't it? I think. Know what you think, Natalie, to that comment?
Yeah, to be honest, Chris, I find it difficult to know how to respond. At this moment, I'm without hope. Well, I'm holding on to, obviously the resistance and the groundswell of people, but I think those who are ruling us, I guess certainly in the West, they're not interested in bringing this to a just end. They're not interested in bringing about a ceasefire. It's a horrendous time to be living in. And I mean, and I have the privilege, right? We have the privilege of saying it's horrendous, and I feel exhausted and I feel devastated. But this is what Palestinians are suffering is something we can't even begin to comprehend.
Absolutely.
There is a Tory MP, though, isn't there? Is it Crispin Blunt? Who is who's trying to activate the ICC into bringing forward arrests and bring people to the International Criminal Court. I don't know how successful they'll be in doing that. I can't imagine it happening because these people always seem to get away with everything. But it's a start, and it's a step in the right direction, I would think. And hopefully they're busy collecting lots of evidence and information about these people. I mean, there's been an uproar this last week about Keir Starmer and his comments. Chris, if you had anything to say about Keir Starmer and what he's had to say. Bobby Carnegie's left us a comment. How absolutely shocking Keir Starmer, leader of the UK Labour Party, condoned Israel military right to blockade to the Palestinian people of vital life-supporting aid. We await backlash from many Labour councillors resigning posts and a mass signed letter from Labour MPs and supporters decrying Keir Starmer's warmongering. And in fact, there has been many Muslim Labour councillors who've resigned this week or in the last couple of days. And just before we came on air, I was reading that news reporters have been reporting that MPs have been having a very stern talking to the leadership in the Labour Party about their response to this. So what's your comments on that, Chris?
Well, Keir Starmer's an utterly repugnant individual, isn't he? And he's totally bought into the whole Zionist project. Indeed, he said, didn't he, that he supports Zionism without qualification. He was funded, as we've just discussed in the conversation with Natalie. His leadership bid was funded by prominent Zionists. And we know he's an authoritarian, and the man would be a disaster as prime minister. I think far worse than the Tories, which is an astonishing thing to say for somebody like me who was in the Labour Party for 44 years and who always believed that a Labour government was always a bad Labour government was always better than any Tory government. But I don't honestly believe that anymore. There is no real difference between the two, and in many respects, I think a Labour government could be even worse, particularly on this issue. And his authoritarian mentality, I think, could see a Labour government going even further than Suella Braverman has sought to do with her letter, as I mentioned, that's gone round to all of the chief constables. So it's good to see that people are resigning from the Labour Party. More people are resigning from the Labour Party. Frankly, I'm astonished that anybody's remained in the Labour Party for as long as they have, given the direction of travel that he's taken on a whole range of different topics, whether it be the domestic policy agenda or indeed, as we're talking about this evening, the foreign policy positions that they've taken. And hopefully that many of those people have been expressing their disillusion, will follow through and leave, and I hope that this will lead to or helping to lead towards anyway the building of an alternative left grouping, as it were, to what is the flip side of the Tory coin. And we're beginning to sort of see that. You and I, as you know, obviously we've joined the Workers' Party. We hope that more people will join us in the Workers' Party. The Workers' Party is the only party, as far as I can tell, which has given its unambiguous support to the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian resistance. And if people want to see a political voice to their concerns about the British foreign policy and the situation that we're seeing unfolding in Palestine at the moment, then there's a home in the Workers' Party. And I'll be writing out, and indeed the letter may have already gone actually to all Labour councillors, inviting them to consider resigning from the Labour Party and joining the Workers' Party in view of the stance that Keir Starmer has taken. It's an utterly inhuman position. It's an astonishing position that any politician could have said what he said, let alone a Labour politician, a Labour leader, to be saying these things. It's kind of beyond the pale. But yeah, I don't know whether I guess, Natalie, you probably agree with that, or maybe you may have other thoughts about that. But
no, I think Keir Starmer is an utter disgrace to not just to the Labour Party, but to humanity in general. And my understanding is a human rights lawyer, right? The guy
allegedly
sold his soul a long time ago. It would seem to me, but there's a lot of us, unfortunately, that recognise that, and too many people fell for, his lies in the leadership campaign, and that's what's so devastating. But I think that, it's interesting because if we look at, it's Crispin Blunt, is that right? Is the
yes, indeed. Ironically, it's a Tory leading the charge. Yeah.
Absolutely, respect to him. But can you imagine if he was actually Labour? He probably would be expelled by now already.
Well, absolutely. That's the astonishing thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and history will judge these individuals, but it's hard as we live through this time, right? We know that history will vindicate those who took a stance for what was right, and will condemn them. But having to live through history is really not much fun.
No, indeed.
Yeah. I think it's a mask off moment for the Labour Party. And not only Keir Starmer, but also the lackeys that surround him, Lisa Nandy, Angela Rayner, and co. Richard Bergen has put an early day motion together. Unfortunately, he's only managed to get 83 politicians to sign the motion so far. So he needs a lot more support for that. So I would ask everybody to email their MPs. You can find your MP's email address on Find My MP, and write to them and tell them to, in your name, to sign that early day motion requesting a ceasefire immediately.
Yes, absolutely. Any final comments from our viewers before we close then?
There's a few more. Paul McCord says the warped mindset and reasoning of the Zionist imperialists should be called out and exposed for what it is and what they are. Totally agree with that, Paul. Act Sharp bans. The weapons industry has its talons deep into the region. They're developing weapons that are tested on the Gaza Strip. That's why Israel has the political support and the protection of the West. Yeah, and I believe Elbit Systems are actually using a very new weapon called it's called Iron Sting. I've been reading about, and I've heard a lot of doctors in the Gaza Strip who've been talking about the injuries that they're seeing coming in. It's stuff that they've never seen before. The burns that these new weapons are causing are absolutely horrific. Ivory Towers says, isn't it interesting how with all our instant digital media, the powers that be can still get away with blatantly lying to us? It proves that only we, the people, can change the world, and we must. Absolutely. And, you know, having witnessed it, I've been on social media 24/7 since it started, and having witnessed the dead baby story, the rape story, all these the stories coming out about what happened in Be'eri kibbutz. There's lots of different things. Oh, and the latest one is they interrogated a Hamas what do you call it, supporter, terrorist, and they found a leaflet on him showing how to make chemical weapons. So we think this might be a precursor to a false flag event like the one that took us into Syria, when they said that would be the red line if Assad used chemical weapons, and then lo and behold there was this false flag about the Duma affair when they said they used chemical weapons, and they didn't at all. So we need to keep an eye on that one, because that leaflet actually turned out to be a book. It was the front page of a book. People on social media found very quickly it was the front page of a book that they'd just laminated, and they'd photocopied inserts out of the pages of this book and laminated them so that they could show them on TV as proof that they were going to make chemical weapons. I mean, so far, everything that they've come out, there was Ben Shapiro was showing AI tampered with pictures. Everything they've come out with so far has been debunked. I don't think there's any truth behind anything that they're saying at the moment.
Well, the good thing. Oh, go on. Yeah, go on the last one.
Go on, Chris. What were you going to say?
No. I was going to say, I was just going to close us off, but you've got one more last comment.
Yeah, one more from our Kira over in Ireland, who joins us every week. She says, yes, we are seeing Israeli witnesses say hostages were killed by Israeli crossfire and houses with hostages, and Hamas was shelled to bits, killing all. No mention of Israeli negotiators brought in. So I don't know whether you've seen that. It's a radio interview with one of the kibbutz survivors who witnessed everything that happened. And again, they were saying that the Hamas people were treating them very humanely. And then when the IDF soldiers came in, they just started shooting everyone to bits, including all the hostages. And again, that's another witness. I think you mentioned that to do with the Hannibal option.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the Hannibal directive. Yes, absolutely. Could very well be linked to that. But listen, thanks very much, Sean, and thank you, Natalie, for taking the time out to join us to discuss this really tragic situation that's unfolding on our television screens. And we're going to be obviously monitoring the situation. We'll probably return to the same topic next week, but in the meantime, thanks everybody for watching this evening. If you can, please show your solidarity on the streets for the Palestinian people, and do what you can by signing the petitions that have been mentioned this evening, and obviously, do your bit on social media. The difference today, I think, between the past, because the Israelis have always engaged in propaganda, is that we do have these social media platforms to provide an alternative narrative. And that's why, in many ways, I believe that we are winning the war of words. So that's all we can really do, I suppose, here in the UK, as Natalie is saying. We can do what we can do, and that is to try and make sure that we show our solidarity and we do our best to, spread the truth of the reality of the situation by using the various social media platforms that we have at our disposal. And despite all the efforts to, influence the algorithms, as it were, to limit our reach, if all of us are doing this, all of us are sharing this information, it makes it impossible for these vested interests to close us down. So I think, that important message, which I think a lot of people have been saying in the comments this evening, and what we've been touching on as we've discussed this evening, is that, the strength of our collective solidarity. It's a topic, it's a theme that we return to time and time again on so many issues, that if we could just realize the strength of our collective effort, then we would be and will be unstoppable. So thanks again, Natalie, for joining. Thanks everybody for watching. Hopefully we'll be back next week at the same time. So until then, this is Chris Williamson saying bye for now.